안녕하세요. 코인 앤드류입니다. 오늘은 재미는 좀 없지만 시청자분들에게 도움이 될 수 있을 만한 영상을 가져왔습니다. 무조건 보셔야 하는 보약 같은 영상입니다. 맛없는 게 몸에 좋은 거 아시죠? 기존에 제 채널에 올렸던 영상들은 유명한 전문가들이 비트코인이 이번 상승장에 얼마까지 간다, 이런 예측류의 영상이었고, 시청자분들은 그런 영상을 좋아하시는 걸 잘 알지만 이번 영상은 제가 좋아하는 투자자인 마크 유스코가 1비트코인은 1비트코인이다, 즉 비트코인의 본질적인 가치가 왜 중요한지에 대한 영상입니다. 제가 마크 유스코를 좋아하는 이유는 차트뿐만이 아니라 거시경제에 대해서 빠삭한 투자자라는 이유도 있지만 누구나 경제에 대해서 양질의 정보를 이해하기 쉽게 설명을 잘 해주기 때문인데요. 오늘 영상 보시고 정말 좋은 인사이트 얻어 가셨으면 좋겠습니다. 아참, 그리고 4분 36초부터 앤드류 팀에서 만든 알파비 보조지표 무료 신청하는 방법이 잠깐 소개됩니다. 필요하신 분들은 넘겨서 보세요. 영상 보시죠.
Macro can be summed up in a simple word, two simple words: money supply, right? Why we're talking about all this other stuff, right? Why Bitcoin's so great. The money supply has been growing at a truly astonishing rate for a very long time. And it's because of, my generation, the boomers. The boomers create a bunch of entitlements. What's an entitlement? It's a promise you make to yourself that you don't fund, that you ask your kids to pay for. Who wouldn't vote for that? So the boomers voted for all these entitlements. And turns out the only way to get them was to issue lots and lots of debt. So we have this massive debt overhang, 36 trillion and rising. And then there's that T word again. So what does all that mean? Well, what that means is in order to service the debt, right, in order to create GDP when you have so much leverage, you have to increase the circulation of money. So money supply has grown about 8% since the creation of the Fed. And all this boils down to the difference between real money, right? Money that doesn't devalue, and devaluing paper currencies, fiat currencies. So from 1776 to 1913, a dollar was worth a dollar. There's a little fluctuation in value around wars and depressions, but a dollar was worth a dollar. There was no such thing as inflation. So then the Fed was created in 1913. Well, why was the Fed created in 1913? Well, if you go all the way back, right? Who had the first world reserve currency? Portugal, interestingly enough. Well, how does little tiny Portugal, right, about the size of, New Jersey, have world reserve currency? Well, they had the fastest, most powerful navy because they had the tallest trees. Well, then the Spanish Armada overtook them and they became the world reserve currency. And then little Netherlands, they created the first central bank. They created a bank where they could literally print money out of thin air. Before that, money had to be earned or created or held. It was commodity-based, gold and silver. Well, the Dutch said, screw that. We don't want to go find it. We'll just print it. So they created this bank, and they funded a mercenary force, which took over the Spanish Armada. Well, then Napoleon, who was a pretty good general, you guys all seen the movie, took them over, and they had it for a while. Well, then some of the Rothschilds went up to the UK, and they took the model from the Netherlands and created a central bank in the UK, and they funded steamship technology, which defeated the French Navy. And then they were the world reserve currency. And they were the dominant superpower for, 70 plus years. The sun never set on the British Empire. And then in 1913, coincidentally, they invaded Mesopotamia, incurred a bunch of debt. The pound sterling collapsed. The dollar ascended. Over the next 31 years, we became the ascendant power. We were, little emerging market before that. And we had nuclear power. So our Navy has kept us the world superpower. But we also cut a deal in 1971 with the Saudis saying, look, as long as you price oil in dollars, we'll protect you because that keeps the dollar the hegemonic world reserve currency. Well, now what's going on? Well, we did all this. We established the Fed. The Fed has been stealing 2% of our wealth or more every year. I mean, think about that. Who came up with an idea that over a 30-year period, half my wealth has been confiscated? That's not good for me. In no way is that good for me. So this idea of inflation, but it makes us feel good because our homes and our stocks and our stuff goes up. Like I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. According to Zillow, my house went up 50% in the last 2 years. But my house did not grow. It did not get more efficient. It actually wore out a little bit. I had to put money into it. What happened? The money got worse. And this is why Bitcoin is so awesome and how it all kind of comes back to macro and ultimately China is one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin.
구독자분들을 위해서 10년 경력 개발자 출신 트레이더와 프롬프트 엔지니어가 같이 만든 앤드류 트레이딩팀 알파빗 오토 프로 지표 무료 신청을 오픈했습니다. 현재 유료로 팔고 있는 그만큼 가치 있는 지표이지만 구독자분들 성원에 힘입어 저 또한 도움을 받고 있기 때문에 고민 끝에 선착순 50명만 신청제로 받기로 했습니다. 초보자분들부터 경력이 오래된 트레이더분들까지 굉장히 큰 도움을 받을 수 있는 지표라 도움이 되실 거라고 자부합니다. 또한 실제로 사용해보고 사용 후기까지 적어주시는 분들 5명을 선별해서 알파빗 오토 프로 지표 평생 이용권을 드리려고 합니다. 신청 방법은 하단 더보기란에 나와 있으니 많은 신청 부탁드립니다.
I do have concerns that we're on our way to a recession. Right? Because you've seen the GDP now collapse from 4% to minus 2.8. So arguably we're going to have a little, ugly setback in growth. Ultimately, I think we're in a place where the response is going to be massively good for Bitcoin, right? We're going to have to cut rates. We're going to have to increase the money supply back to high single digits, maybe even low double digits. And in that world, one Bitcoin's one Bitcoin, but we don't price in Bitcoin, price in dollars, so the price is going to go up. I'm 61. I'm the second to last year of the boomers. My wife's 60. She just turned 61 too. I'm about to turn 62. But we're the last 2 years of the boomers, and we still got, a decade before we can take our entitlements. So you got at least another 10 years where you got to prop up that generation because all of our wealth, the boomers, is in real estate and stocks. So you can't let those two things go down. And so even if there's a short-term flush, I think there will be. Economic data are pointing to it. Leading economic indicators are pointing to it. So all that said, I think it will be short-lived because I think the response from the US government and mostly from China. China is firing the liquidity bazooka like we've never seen because they can't afford to have what happened to Japan happen to them. Because Japan, remember, in the 70s and 80s was the economic miracle. They were going to take over the world. We would send our people over to study under Japanese companies. And then they had a deflationary debt collapse and they've been, moribund for 30 years. China can't afford that because they got too many people. So they are printing capital and they're in a different position. They have more reserves. They have the largest reserves in the world, over $3 trillion. And so they have the economic power to recapitalize their banks, to, sweep the bad real estate stuff under the rug. And I'm sure you've seen the videos, right? Or if maybe you've been. If you go to China, it's unbelievable. It's like living in the future. I mean, it's absolutely stunning what they have achieved. And I love the pictures where it shows, Shenzhen 30 years ago and Shenzhen today. It's like, oh my God, it was a field. And now it's this metropolis like right out of a science fiction movie. Investors and investing has always been the same, right? Everyone should have 3 buckets. You have a liquidity bucket that funds your lifestyle, 5 to 15%. To pay the bills and pay the rent and travel and food. And that needs to be liquid. It needs to be high quality. It can't have lots of volatility. That's your liquidity bucket. Then up here, you got the 10 to 15% of the get rich bucket. And that's where I would say that's where you're doing the friend's condo deal, the brother-in-law's venture deal, the hot stock tip you got. You're going to lose it all, so keep it small. No, I'm just kidding around. But that's where you put, things that you think have big potential to return lots. And some of them go to zero, but that's okay because that's where you take your big tail risk. Then 70% is in the stay rich bucket. I said, well, what if I'm not rich yet? Well, then you got to have more in the get rich bucket, plus your income and plus your, you want to get some passive income. So, but that stay rich bucket, 70%, that needs to follow the endowment model, right? Which is a diversified portfolio of high volatility assets. And the younger you are, the more volatile, right? That are uncorrelated. Like, I believe if you're under 65, it should actually be against the law to own bonds. Like literally, it should be against the law, especially in your 401k, because you can't touch your 401k until you're 71 and a half. So why would you put bonds in there? You should have venture capital and real estate and commodities and Bitcoin and all the most volatile things because you can't touch it. Bonds are for the liquidity bucket to spend. Nothing else. So in the stay rich bucket, you want to have an equity orientation, but equity doesn't mean stocks. It means private equity, real estate equity, commodity equity, stock equity, digital assets, not equity, but digital assets. Bitcoin should be a meaningful piece of that portfolio. Why? Well, because it's the perfect asset. It has 80 vol, which means it has a long-term high compound rate of return, right? It has the same vol as Amazon, and yet it has twice the compound return. Now, it's only been doing it for 16 years instead of 30. So Bitcoin's number will come down and they'll probably have the same, but they have the same vol. I use Amazon all the time. Amazon, every year for 30 years, has had a double-digit drawdown, including this year. It's in one right now. When was the right time to sell it? Never. But who bought it on day one and held to today? But the beautiful thing about a stay rich portfolio, by having uncorrelated assets, why Bitcoin's so perfect, why Amazon's so good, they're not correlated with one another. Bitcoin is 0.0 correlated to bonds and 0.15 correlated to stocks. So every time you add it to the portfolio, your risk goes down.